Kang Tae-ho pressed his face against the small window of the transport ship. The sight that greeted him made his breath catch in his throat. Galactic Council Station Omega-7 stretched out before them like a massive metal flower floating in the darkness of space. Its 7 arms spiraled outward from a central hub, each one the size of a city. Ships moved between the arms like tiny insects, their lights blinking as they carried diplomats and traders from across the galaxy. "First time seeing it?" asked Jin Sora from the seat beside him. She was younger than Tae-ho, maybe 25, with short black hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. As his assistant and structural engineer, she had worked with him for 3 years, but this was her first trip to the famous station. "No, but it never gets old," Tae-ho replied. He was 32, tall for a Korean man with calloused hands from years of building designs. His specialty was diplomatic architecture, creating buildings where different species could meet safely. It was important work, but usually quiet work. Embassy construction, meeting halls, cultural centers. Nothing like what waited for them today. Their ship docked at Arm 3 with a soft thud. The artificial gravity kicked in as the airlock sealed. Tae-ho gathered his design tablets and building samples. Sora checked her engineering tools twice. They both wore their best clothes, formal blue jumpsuits with the Earth Diplomatic Corps symbol on the chest. "Remember," Tae-ho said as they walked toward the exit, "we're here for a simple embassy consultation. The Velkari want to discuss building a meeting place for human-Velkari relations. Standard job." Sora nodded, but her expression showed doubt. "Then why did they specifically request you by name? And why all the secrecy about the location?" Tae-ho had wondered the same thing. The message from the Velkari had been short. "Human architect Kang Tae-ho required for urgent construction project. Bring structural engineer. Come to Station Omega-7, Arm 3, Dock 12. Tell no one else." It was strange, but the pay offered was enough to fund his small company for 2 years. The airlock opened with a hiss. The corridor beyond was built for many different species, wide enough for the massive Gorland traders, with low handholds for the small pixie diplomats, and air that could be breathed by most known life forms. The smell hit them first, a mix of different atmospheres and too many alien bodies in one place. They followed the signs toward the meeting rooms. Other beings moved around them, tall, thin Zephyrians with their silver skin, round Gorlan merchants, rolling on their 6 legs in small groups of various species Tae-ho couldn't identify. But no humans. That was unusual. Humans were common on diplomatic stations. "Dock 12 meeting room should be just ahead," Sora said, checking her tablet. They turned a corner and stopped. Standing outside the meeting room door was the largest alien Tae-ho had ever seen in person. The Velkari stood 9 feet tall with dark red skin covered in natural armor plates. His arms were as thick as Tae-ho's waist, ending in hands that had 4 fingers tipped with razor-sharp claws. His head was massive, with 3 eyes arranged in a triangle and a mouth full of teeth designed for tearing meat. "You are the humans," the Velkari said. His voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. Each word was carefully pronounced as if speaking their language was difficult. "I am Thrakmor, second speaker for the Velkari Empire." Tae-ho bowed slightly, the way diplomats had taught him. "I'm Kang Tae-ho, and this is Jin Sora. We received your message about an embassy project." Thrakmor's 3 eyes studied them for a long moment. Then he made a sound that might have been laughter, though it sounded more like a growl. "Embassy. Yes, we said embassy. Come inside, humans. We must speak of building, but not the building you think." The meeting room was large and cold, designed for Velkari comfort. The chairs were too big for humans, so Tae-ho and Sora sat on the edge of their seats, feet barely touching the floor. Thrakmor remained standing, his claws clicking on the metal table as he placed his hands on its surface. "Your species builds homes," Thrakmor said, without introduction. "Not just shelters, not just fortresses. Homes. Places where your kind feels safe." Sora glanced at Tae-ho, confused. "Well, yes, that's basic architecture. Every species builds homes." "No," Thrakmor said, his voice growing louder. Every species builds shelters, places to hide from weather, from enemies. But humans build different. You build places where you rest without weapons, where your young play without fear, where your old ones sit in peace until death comes. He paused, his claws scraping the table. My people cannot do this. Tejo felt a chill run down his spine. The Velkari Empire controlled 17 star systems. They were known as the fiercest warriors in the galaxy, creatures who could tear apart battle mechs with their bare hands. They were afraid of nothing. I don't understand, Tejo said carefully. Thrakmor walked to the room's window, looking out at the stars. My people are hunters. We have always been hunters. We take what we want, we defeat our enemies, we conquer worlds. But we do not know how to rest. Our buildings are boxes of metal and stone. We put weapons in every room. We put escape routes in every wall. We sleep with one eye open, always ready to fight or run. He turned back to them, and for the first time, Tejo saw something in the alien's eyes that surprised him. Fear. 3 months ago, my nephew was killed in his own home, Thrakmor continued, assassinated while he slept. The killer walked through 15 security systems, past 50 guards, into a room with no windows and only one door. My nephew had a blaster under his pillow, a knife by his bed, armor hanging on the wall. He was one of our greatest warriors. But in his sleep, in his own home, he was helpless. Sora leaned forward. And this happens often? Too often. My people rule through strength, but we cannot protect ourselves in our own homes. We cannot rest. We cannot feel safe. Our children grow up afraid in their own beds. Our elders die in fear, waiting for enemies in every shadow. Thrakmor's claws extended slightly. Other species in the galaxy mock us. They call us the homeless conquerors and warriors who cannot rest. Tejo was beginning to understand. And you think humans can help? We have studied your species. Humans live in places that are both fortress and sanctuary. You create rooms where weapons are not needed. You design spaces where the mind can rest. Your young ones sleep peacefully. Your old ones sit in gardens watching flowers grow, not watching for enemies. Thrakmor moved closer to them. The Velkari Empire wishes to hire human architects, not to build an embassy, to build us a home. The silence stretched for several seconds. Sora was the first to speak. You want us to design your buildings? More than that. We want you to design our new capital, the Imperial Palace on Velkran Prime, the center of our empire. And if that succeeds, Thrakmor paused. Every Velkari world will need human architects. Every Velkari home will need human design. Tejo's mind raced. This wasn't just a building project. This was potentially the largest architectural contract in galactic history. But it was also dangerous. If they failed, if the Velkari leaders were assassinated in a human-designed building, it would mean war. Why us specifically? Sora asked. There are bigger human architectural firms. Because you specialize in diplomatic buildings, places where enemies can meet safely, places where trust can grow. Thrakmor's 3 eyes focused on Tejo. You understand how to build for peace, not just war. Tejo looked at Sora. She gave him a small nod. They both knew this was bigger than anything they had ever done. It was also the most important job they might ever get. We'll need to visit your homeworld, Tejo said finally. We'll need to understand your culture, your needs, your fears. Already arranged. A ship waits to take you to Velkran Prime. Thrakmor made that grinding sound again. But know this, humans. If you fail, if our leaders die in buildings you design, your species will pay the price. Tejo felt the weight of those words, but he also felt something else. Excitement. Challenge. The chance to do something no human had ever done before. We won't fail, he said. Thrakmor stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. We shall see, human. We shall see. The journey to Velkran Prime took 3 days on a Velkari warship. Tejo and Sora were the only humans aboard, surrounded by 9-foot-tall warriors who watched them with curious eyes. The ship itself was a fortress, Thick metal walls, narrow corridors, and weapons visible everywhere. Even the dining hall had blast shields ready to drop at any moment. This is how they live, Sora whispered to Tejo as they ate their meal. Around them, Velkari warriors sat with their backs to walls, eyes constantly scanning for threats that didn't exist. Always ready for battle, even during dinner. When they finally reached Velkron Prime, Tejo understood why the Velkari had called for human help. The planet's surface was covered with structures that looked more like military bunkers than homes. Gray metal boxes connected by fortified walkways, weapon towers every few hundred meters. Nothing soft, nothing comfortable, nothing that suggested peace. Their shuttle landed at the Imperial Complex, the heart of Velkari government. Threckmore met them at the landing pad, along with another Velkari whose armor plates were decorated with golden symbols. "This is Ravenclaw, our High General," Threckmore said. "He will show you our current palace." Ravenclaw was even larger than Threckmore, with scars covering his arms and face. His 3 eyes showed clear suspicion as he looked at the 2 humans. "I do not understand why we need softskins to build for us," he growled. "Velkari have built fortresses for 1,000 years. And in those 1,000 years, how many Velkari leaders have died in their own homes?" Threckmore asked quietly. Ravenclaw's claws extended slightly, but he said nothing. He led them through the palace entrance, a narrow doorway barely wide enough for one Velkari, with weapon scanners and guard posts on both sides. The palace interior was worse than Tejo had imagined. Every room was small and cramped with thick walls and tiny windows. There were no decorations, no comfort items, nothing that suggested anyone lived here rather than just survived here. Emergency alarms were mounted every few feet. Weapon caches were built into the walls. Exit routes were marked with glowing arrows. "This is the Emperor's bedroom," Ravenclaw said, opening a heavy door. The room beyond was barely large enough for the massive bed and a single chair. The walls were solid metal with no windows at all. A weapons rack stood beside the bed, filled with blasters and bladed weapons. "The safest room on the planet. And the loneliest," Sora said quietly. They were interrupted by footsteps in the corridor. A human man approached, tall and thin with gray hair and tired eyes. Behind him walked a human woman with short brown hair and the confident walk of someone used to being the smartest person in the room. "You must be the architects," the man said. "I'm Park Minho, xenopsychologist with the Galactic University. This is Lim De Young, cultural anthropologist. We've been studying the Velkari for 15 years. Throckmore's expression darkened. "I told you humans to stay in your quarters. And we told you that your architects need to understand the real problem," Minho replied calmly. "May we speak privately?" Ravenclaw looked ready to refuse, but Throckmore nodded slowly. They found a small meeting room, another metal box with no windows. The 2 scientists sat across from Tejo and Sora while the Velkari waited outside. "The Velkari aren't just bad at building homes," Da-Young said without introduction. "They're psychologically incapable of it. Their entire species evolved as nomadic pack hunters. They never developed the concept of safe space, because to them, any enclosed space is a potential trap." Minho opened a tablet and showed them brain scans. "Look at this. A Velkari brain in an open field shows normal activity. The same brain in a closed room shows constant stress patterns. Even when they know they're perfectly safe, their minds treat every enclosed space as dangerous. But they built this palace," Tejo pointed out. "They built a fortress, not a home. Notice how every room has multiple exits? How the walls are thick enough to stop explosions? How weapons are placed everywhere?" De-Young gestured around the room. "This isn't a place to live. It's a place to make a last stand." Sora leaned forward. "Then how do they sleep? How do they rest?" "They don't really. Velkari sleep in shifts and groups with guards posted. Even their children are taught to sleep lightly, ready to run at the first sign of danger." Minho closed the tablet. "It's why they're such effective warriors, but it's also slowly killing them as a species." "Killing them?" "Stress diseases, early death, mental illness. But more importantly, their society is breaking down. Velkari used to live in large family groups, hundreds of individuals supporting each other. Now they live in small, isolated units, because large groups in enclosed spaces trigger panic responses. De Young pulled up another display. We've been tracking this across multiple species, the Corythian swarm, the Nethys consortium, the shadow clans, all predator species, all with the same problem. They can conquer worlds, but they can't create sanctuaries. Tejo felt pieces of a puzzle clicking together in his mind. And humans are different. Completely different. Humans evolved as both predators and protectors. You hunted, but you also built safe camps for your young and elderly. You learned to create spaces that were both defensible and comfortable. Minho smiled. You're the only species we know that can sleep peacefully in a locked room. The door opened and Thrakmor entered, followed by Ravenclaw. Your private discussion is finished? We were just explaining the challenge, De Young said. Your people need more than just better buildings. You need to learn what home means. Ravenclaw's claws scraped the table. We do not need soft skin, concepts of comfort. We need security. You have security, Sora said. This palace has more defenses than some military bases. But your emperor still doesn't feel safe, does he? The silence that followed was answer enough. Thrakmor sat heavily in one of the oversized chairs. 3 emperors have died in this palace, all killed by assassins who somehow bypassed our security. The current emperor sleeps only 2 hours at a time, and never in the same room twice. Because security isn't the same as safety, Tejo said. He was beginning to see the real scope of the problem. You've built a prison, not a home. Then what would you build? Ravenclaw demanded. Tejo closed his eyes, thinking. He imagined a Velkari coming home after a long day, wanting to rest, to feel at peace. What would that look like? Not a fortress, not a bunker, something entirely different. Windows, he said suddenly. Large windows with views of the sky and gardens. Rooms with only one purpose, sleeping or eating or meeting with family. Spaces with soft lighting and comfortable furniture. Hallways wide enough for 3 Velkari to walk side by side, talking and laughing. Laughing? Ravenclaw's voice showed disbelief. In their homes? Why not? Home should be where you feel so safe that you can laugh, where you can let your guard down, where you can be vulnerable without being weak. Tejo opened his eyes. A place where weapons aren't needed because the people inside trust each other completely. Minho and Da Young exchanged glances. It's theoretically possible, Minho said slowly, but it would require retraining their entire psychological response to enclosed spaces. The design would have to be perfect, Da Young added. One mistake, one moment where a Velkari feels trapped instead of safe, and they'll panic. Panic in a group of armed Velkari would be very bad, Thrakmor finished. But the current situation is also very bad. Our people grow more afraid each year. Our children refuse to enter buildings without weapons. Our elderly die alone because no one feels safe visiting them in their homes. Sora had been quiet during the discussion, but now she spoke up. What about starting small? Not the Imperial Palace, but something smaller. A test building where we can try different ideas. The governor's residence in the northern city, Thrakmor, said immediately. It was damaged in a recent battle. Governor Scartooth has been requesting repairs for months, but every design our architects create feels wrong to him. Scartooth? Tejo asked. A young governor, barely 60 years old. He served with distinction in the border wars, but since returning home, he has struggled with enclosed spaces. He would be willing to test new ideas if they might help. Ravenclaw stood suddenly. This is foolishness. Velkari do not need soft skin comfort. We need stronger walls, better weapons, more guards. And if the humans fail, Thrakmor asked, what will we have lost? But if they succeed, if they can teach us to feel safe in our own homes, what will we have gained? The High General was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he nodded reluctantly. One building, one test. But if there is even one attack, one security failure, the experiment ends. Tejo felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. They weren't just designing a building. They were trying to teach an entire species what it meant to feel at home. And if they failed, it wouldn't just end their contract. It might end any chance of humans helping other species across the galaxy. But as he looked around the metal box they sat in, with its thick walls and hidden weapons and air of constant fear, he knew they had to try. Every being in the universe deserved a place where they could feel safe, where they could rest, where they could simply be at peace. "When can we meet Governor Scartooth?" he asked. Thrackmore's grinding laugh filled the room. "Tomorrow, human." 6 months after the first Velkari building was completed, Choi Woo-jin received his 1,000th request for human architecture services. He sat in his small office on Earth, staring at messages from species he had never heard of, all asking for the same thing: homes that felt safe. The Velkari governor's residence had been a complete success. Governor Scartooth now slept 8 hours straight every night, something no Velkari had done in recorded history. More importantly, he had started holding dinner parties, social gatherings in his own home, with no weapons allowed and no guards. Inside the dining room, word spread fast across the galaxy. "The Carithian swarm wants to hire us," said Kim Yoo-jin, Woo-jin's business partner, as she entered the office carrying a stack of data tablets. "They've offered to pay triple the normal rate." Woo-jin knew about the Carithians. They were an insectoid, species that lived in giant hive structures, but even those felt like military installations rather than homes. Each individual Carithian had their own small cell, but they were afraid to spend time there alone. "What about the Nethys Consortium?" Yoo-jin asked, checking another tablet. "They're energy-based beings, but they still need physical spaces to rest their consciousness." The requests kept coming. Hong Jae-min, working from his lab in Seoul, had developed new building materials specifically for different alien psychologies. Smart walls that could become transparent or solid depending on the occupant's stress levels. Floor materials that absorbed sound for nervous species or amplified it for those who felt safer with audio feedback. Lighting systems that adjusted automatically to create the most calming environment for each type of being. But the biggest surprise came from the Galactic Council itself. "Elder Thalos wants to meet with you," Sora told Woo-jin over the video call from Velkron Prime. She and Tae-ho had been living there for months, overseeing the construction of 12 new Velkari residential complexes. "He's calling an emergency session about human architectural services." The meeting was held on the council's main station, in the great chamber where representatives from 200 species gathered to make decisions affecting the entire galaxy. Woo-jin had never been in such an important place. The chamber was enormous, with sections designed for every type of being: water tanks for aquatic species, high-pressure zones for dense atmosphere beings, low-gravity areas for fragile species. Elder Thalos was a wisdom, an ancient species that looked like floating crystals surrounded by soft light. His voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We have called this session to discuss a matter of great importance: the humans and their architecture." Murmurs filled the chamber. Woo-jin saw representatives of dozens of species, many he recognized from recent requests for human services. The Velkari delegation sat in their reinforced section, with Thrackmore nodding respectfully to Woo-jin. "In the past 6 months," Elder Thalos continued, 17 species have begun hiring human architects to design their homes. This is unprecedented. No single species has ever become so essential to galactic society, so quickly. A representative from the Zephyrian collective stood up. The Zephyrians were tall and silver-skinned, known for their speed and hunting abilities. "We protest this dependency. Species should not require outside help to build their own homes." And, "Yet," came a voice from the Carithian section, "our people sleep peacefully for the first time in our history. Human-designed spaces have reduced stress illness in our population by 70%. Elder Thalos pulsed brighter. "This is our concern. What happens if humanity decides to stop providing these services? What happens if they use this dependency as a weapon?" Song Hyun-woo, who had joined Woo-jin for the meeting, stood up in the human section. As a structural engineer, he had been working with multiple species and understood the situation better than most. With respect, Elder Thalos, you're looking at this backwards. We're not making species dependent, we're making them independent. Explain. Before human architecture, these species lived in constant fear in their own homes. They couldn't rest, couldn't feel safe, couldn't develop stable societies. Now they're building art centers, schools, hospitals, things that require people to feel secure enough to stay in one place for extended periods. Yusei Ram, attending virtually from her research station, added her voice to the discussion. Our psychological studies show that species with human-designed homes are developing new social behaviors. The Velkari are creating their first philosophical schools. The Carithians are writing poetry. These are activities that require mental peace. But what is the cost? The Zephyrian representative persisted. Already we hear reports of species refusing to live in non-human buildings. What happens when every home in the galaxy must be designed by humans? Lee Dong-hyuk had been quiet during the debate, but now he stood. As a military advisor, his perspective was different from the architects and psychologists. May I share something we've discovered about defensive capabilities? Elder Thalos pulsed in agreement. Human-designed buildings aren't just comfortable, they're strategically superior. When the Zephyrian raiders attacked the Velkari colony on Rimex, the Velkari defenders in human-built structures fought with unprecedented coordination. They won a battle they should have lost. The Zephyrian representative's silver skin darkened with anger. You accuse us of raiding? I'm simply stating facts. The attack happened and the results were recorded. Dong-hyuk displayed tactical data on the chamber's main screen. Predator species fighting from spaces where they feel truly safe are 3 times more effective than those in traditional fortresses. Shin Bora, monitoring from orbit around a distant world, provided additional data. It's not just about individual comfort. Human-designed communities are developing unprecedented cooperation between different species. On Colony 7, Velkari and Carithian families are living in the same residential complex, former predator enemies now sharing gardens and recreation areas. The chamber fell silent. The idea of traditional enemies living peacefully together was almost unthinkable. Elder Thalos floated higher, his crystal form spinning slowly. This information is concerning. If human architecture can create such significant changes in behavior, what does this mean for galactic balance? It means maybe we've been thinking about things wrong, said Jang Min-seo, who had just arrived from Earth. As the new director of the Human Habitat Institute, she carried significant authority. We've spent thousands of years assuming that different species could never truly coexist because of their fundamental nature. But what if the problem wasn't their nature? What if it was their environment? Elaborate. Every species evolved, in different conditions, developed different survival instincts, but most of those instincts assume hostile environments. What happens when you create truly safe environments? What happens when a predator species doesn't need to be predatory to survive? Quan Tae-jung, working with former enemy species on Colony 7, provided examples via video link. Velkari children who grow up in human-designed homes show 30% less aggressive behavior than their parents. They're still strong, still capable warriors when needed, but they're also capable of gentleness. The implications hung in the air like a challenge. If environment could change fundamental behavior, then perhaps the galaxy's entire understanding of species relations was wrong. There is another concern, Elder Thalos said finally. If human architecture is so valuable, so essential, what prevents humanity from demanding tribute? What prevents them from controlling other species through this dependency? Bae Su-jin had been documenting the psychological changes across multiple worlds. Her research provided the answer. Because humans don't think that way. Human architecture isn't about control. It's about creating spaces where control isn't necessary. The goal is always to help occupants feel secure enough to be vulnerable, to trust, to cooperate rather than dominate. And if humans change their minds? Wu Jin finally spoke up, his voice carrying across the great chamber. Then you find other humans. We're not a unified species with a single government. We're thousands of different communities, cultures, and companies. If one group tried to abuse this trust, others would step in to maintain it. Elder Thalos was quiet for a long time, his crystal form slowly rotating as he processed the information. Around the chamber, representatives whispered among themselves in dozens of languages. "We have received a transmission," Elder Thalos announced suddenly. "From the far edge of known space, a species called the Ravagers. They have heard of human architecture and wish to hire human services." The chamber erupted in shocked voices. The Ravagers were legendary, a species so aggressive they had never been successfully contacted. They destroyed everything they encountered, leaving no survivors to describe them. "They sent a simple message," Elder Thalos continued. We quote, "We have conquered 1,000 worlds, but we do not know peace. We have heard that humans can build homes where warriors rest without fear. We offer tribute of rare metals and safe passage through our territory in exchange for this knowledge." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the most aggressive species in known space were asking humans to teach them how to feel safe at home. Wu Jin looked around the chamber, at representatives of hundreds of species. The attack came without warning on a Tuesday morning Galactic Standard Time. Song Hyunwoo was reviewing building plans in his temporary office on Velkari Colony Rimex when the first explosions shook the ground. Through his window, he could see Zephyrian attack ships streaking across the sky, their silver hulls gleaming in the morning sun. "All humans to emergency positions," came the announcement over the colony's communication system. "This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." Hyunwoo grabbed his emergency kit and ran toward the nearest human-designed building, a Velkari residential complex he had helped design 6 months earlier. As he ran, he could see the strategy behind the attack. The Zephyrian ships were targeting the new building specifically, ignoring the old fortress-style structures that dotted the colony. Inside the residential complex, he found chaos. 50 Velkari families were crowded into the main community area, their children crying and adults arguing in their grinding voices. But something was different from what Hyunwoo expected. Despite the panic, no one had weapons drawn. No one was fighting for position near the exits. They were scared, but they weren't scattered. "Human Hyunwoo," called Governor Scartooth, pushing through the crowd. The massive Velkari's armor was scratched from debris, but his 3 eyes were clear and focused. "Your building holds. The old fortress took direct hit, completely destroyed, but your walls stand strong." Another explosion rocked the building, but the light stayed on, and the structure didn't shake. Hyunwoo had designed it with multiple redundant systems, but more importantly, he had designed it to feel safe even during emergencies. "Status report," he asked. "Zephyrian fleet of 30 ships. They came specifically to test our defenses, to prove that human buildings are weaknesses, not strengths." Scartooth's claws clicked together in the Velkari gesture of frustration. "They chose wrong day to test us." Through the building's large windows that traditional Velkari architecture would never have included, Hyunwoo could see Velkari, defenders moving between the human-designed buildings with coordinated precision. Instead of each warrior fighting alone from isolated positions, they were working together, covering each other, sharing information. "They're fighting differently," he realized. Yes, in Old Fortress, each warrior protects own position, fights own battle. Here, in space that feels safe, we fight as family. Scartooth moved to the window, watching his people below. "When you are not afraid in your base, you can be truly fierce in battle." Yuseram's voice crackled over Hyunwoo's communicator, from her research station in orbit. "I'm tracking the battle from up here. The tactical data is incredible. Velkari forces in human-designed positions are showing coordination levels I've never seen from individual-focused predator species." Colony 7 Lee Dong-hyuk was watching similar scenes unfold. The Zephyrian attack wasn't limited to Rimex. They had launched simultaneous strikes on 4 colonies, all targeting human-designed structures. But instead of the easy victories they expected, they were meeting unexpected resistance. "The Corithians are fighting alongside the Velkari," Dong-hyuk reported over the communication network. "Former enemies are coordinating their defenses because they're protecting the same residential complex." Shin Bo-ra, monitoring from her orbital platform, provided real-time analysis. Stress levels in human-designed buildings are 60% lower than in traditional fortresses, even during active combat. The occupants feel secure enough in their base to focus entirely on external threats. The battle raged for 6 hours. When it ended, the results shocked everyone, including the humans who had designed the buildings. Jiang Minxiu arrived on Rimex 2 days later to survey the damage. As director of the Human Habitat Institute, she needed to understand what had happened and why the human-designed structures had performed so differently from traditional buildings. 17 traditional Velkari fortresses were destroyed, Governor Scartooth reported as they walked through the colony. But not one human-designed building fell. More importantly, not one defender in human building was lost to panic or confusion. They stopped at the site where the old colonial headquarters had stood. Nothing remained but twisted metal and rubble. 50 meters away, a human-designed community center showed only minor damage to its outer walls. The difference isn't just in construction materials, Minxiu said, studying her readings. It's in how the defenders behaved. Quan Taizhong had flown in from Colony 7 with similar reports. The multi-species residential complex I designed was hit with everything the Zephyrians had. But Velkari, Corithian, and 3 other species fought together to defend it. I watched a Velkari warrior give his weapon to a wounded Corithian so both could continue fighting. That's unprecedented, Sora noted, joining them from her worksite. Predator species don't share weapons. Ever. They do when they're defending a home they all trust, Taizhong replied. When everyone feels equally safe in a space, they'll equally defend it. The most significant change was psychological. Bei Sujin had conducted interviews with defenders from both traditional and human-designed positions. Warriors fighting from old fortresses showed standard stress responses, high adrenaline, tunnel vision, individual focus. Warriors fighting from human buildings showed something I've never seen before in predator species, which is protective instincts instead of survival instincts. They weren't fighting to survive, they were fighting to protect their home and everyone in it. Sujin displayed brain scan data. The neural patterns are completely different. Hong Jaemin had developed new building materials specifically based on the lessons learned from the attack. Smart armor plating that distributes impact energy, communication systems that work even under extreme stress, but most importantly, design elements that maintain psychological safety even during crisis. The attack had another unexpected result. Species across the galaxy that had been hesitant about human architecture now demanded it immediately. Emergency requests from 47 species, reported Kim Yu-jin from Earth. Everyone wants buildings that can turn their warriors into actual defenders instead of just survivors. But the most important response came from an unexpected source. 3 weeks after the attacks, a Zephyrian ship approached Colony 7 under a diplomatic flag. The ship's commander requested permission to speak with human architects. Commander Swiftstrike was typical of his species, tall, silver-skinned, built for speed and precision. But as he stood in the human-designed meeting room, his usual aggressive posture seemed uncertain. "We came to prove human buildings were weakness," he said without introduction, his words sharp and quick like his species' typical speech pattern. "We came to show Galaxy that comfort makes warriors soft." "And what did you find?" asked Wu Jin, who had traveled from Earth specifically for this meeting. "We found warriors who fought harder than we have ever seen. Fighters who protected each other instead of just themselves. Defenders who would rather die than let enemies into their homes." Swiftstrike paused, his silver skin shifting color in what humans had learned was a sign of confusion in Zephyrians. "We found what we have never had." "Which is?" "Something worth fighting for instead of just something to fight against." The Zephyrian commander looked around the room, at the large windows, the comfortable furniture, the soft lighting that created a sense of peace. "Zephyrians are hunters. We live for speed, for pursuit, for conquest. But we do not know rest. We do not know safety. We do not know home." The word came out awkwardly, as if Swiftstrike had never spoken it before. "Our ships are fast and deadly, but they are not places where we feel peace. Our bases are efficient, but they are not places where we wish to stay. We fight constantly, but we fight for territory, for resources, for dominance. never for love of the place we defend. Sora, who had become expert in alien psychology during her months on Velkrun Prime, recognized what was happening. You want what the Velkari have found? Yes. We want to know what it feels like to have a home worth dying for instead of just a position worth holding. Swift Strike's skin shifted again. The Zephyrian High Command wishes to hire human architects. The admission sent shockwaves through galactic politics. If the Zephyrians, the most nomadic, most aggressive species in known space, were requesting human architectural services, then the transformation was complete. Elder Thalos called another emergency council session. This time, the question wasn't whether human architecture was valuable. The question was how to manage a galaxy where every species wanted something they had never had before, a true home. The requests now number in the thousands, Elder Thalos announced to the assembled representatives. Species that have been nomadic for millions of years are asking humans to teach them how to settle. Species that have never cooperated are asking for multi-species residential designs. And the Ravagers? Asked the Corithian representative, still waiting for human architects to reach the edge of space. They have offered safe passage through their territory to any human willing to help them understand what home means. Hyun Woo, attending virtually from Rimex where he was supervising reconstruction, provided the final piece of the puzzle. The galaxy isn't becoming dependent on human architecture. It's learning what home really means. 5 years after that first meeting on Station Omega-7, Kang Tae-ho stood in the central plaza of New Harmony, the galaxy's first truly integrated multi-species city. Around him, buildings rose in elegant curves and practical angles, each one designed for multiple types of inhabitants while maintaining the essential human principle. Everyone deserves to feel safe at home. A Velkari child ran past him, laughing as she chased a small Corithian youngster through a garden where both their families could relax together. The sight still amazed Tae-ho. 5 years ago, such a scene would have been impossible. Velkari and Corithian adults would have fought to the death if they met. Now their children played together while their parents shared meals on nearby benches. Hard to believe, isn't it? Said Jang Min-seo, approaching from the city's administrative building. As director of the Human Habitat Institute, she now oversaw architectural projects across 200 star systems. Sometimes I think we've changed the galaxy more than we intended. Is that a bad thing? Tae-ho asked, watching an elderly Zephyrian teaching a group of mixed-species children how to tend the plaza's flowers. The sight of Swift Strike's grandmother patiently showing Velkari youngsters the proper way to water plants would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. Not bad. Just bigger than we expected. Min-seo gestured toward the residential towers surrounding the plaza. Each of those buildings houses an average of 50 families from 12 different species, former predators and prey living in the same structures, sharing elevators, having dinner parties. The transformation had exceeded everyone's expectations. What started as a simple request to help the Velkari feel safe in their homes had become a galactic revolution in how species related to each other. Jin Sora joined them, carrying data tablets filled with the latest reports from across the galaxy. The Ravagers finished their first city last month. They're calling it Rest Place. Apparently they never had a word for permanent settlement before. The Ravagers had been the most challenging project. When human architects finally reached the edge of known space, they found a species so aggressive they had been fighting continuously for thousands of years. But underneath the violence was the same desperate need for safety that every predator species shared. And the really incredible part, Sora continued, is that they've stopped raiding, completely. Their entire culture was built around taking what they needed from others because they never knew how to create a place worth staying in. Quan Tai-jung approached from the cultural center, where he had been meeting with representatives from the newest member of the galactic community, a species called the Void Hunters, that had just emerged from the dark space between galaxies. The Void Hunters want to build their first permanent settlements, he reported. They've been nomadic for so long they don't even have words for furniture or decoration. They sleep floating in empty space and eat while moving at high speed. It be done? Tae-ho asked. Everything can be adapted. We've learned that every species, no matter how alien, shares the same basic need for safety and belonging. Taijong smiled, though teaching them about bathrooms might be interesting. Their conversation was interrupted by a communication from orbit. Park Min-ho's voice came through the plaza's speakers, broadcast from his research station above the planet. We're receiving the latest psychological survey results from across the galaxy. The changes are remarkable. His voice carried excitement. Species-wide stress indicators are down an average of 65%. Violent crime has decreased by 80% on worlds with significant human architectural presence. Birth rates are up across 47 different species. The numbers told a story that amazed even the humans who had started it all. As species learned to feel safe in their homes, they became less aggressive overall. Wars between traditional enemies had virtually stopped. Instead of fighting over territory, species were cooperating to build better communities. But the most interesting change, Min-ho continued, is in innovation and creativity. Art, music, literature, scientific research, all showing dramatic increases among species living in human-designed environments. Bai Su-jin had documented this phenomenon extensively. When beings felt truly safe, their minds were free to explore ideas beyond simple survival. The Valkyrie had developed their first written poetry. The Corythians were composing symphonies that could be heard and felt through their hive-mind connections. Even the warlike Zephyrians had created a new form of dance that celebrated speed and grace rather than conquest. It makes sense, said Lim De-young, joining their group in the plaza. The cultural anthropologist had spent the last 5 years studying how architecture influenced social development. When you're not spending all your mental energy on staying safe, you can use it for creation instead. Hong Jae-min had continued, developing new technologies to support the galactic transformation. His smart building materials could now adapt to dozens of different species' needs automatically. Walls that adjusted their opacity based on who was in the room. Floors that provided the right texture for clawed feet, tentacles, or energy beings. Lighting that shifted to match the comfort preferences of any inhabitant. The really exciting development, Jamin said via communication link from his Earth laboratory, is that other species are starting to innovate on human designs. The Valkyrie have created a new type of armor plating that's both defensive and decorative. The Corythians developed a building material that can be shaped by thought alone. The transformation wasn't just about copying human ideas, it was about unleashing creativity that had been suppressed by generations of fear and survival thinking. Song Hyun-woo had returned to Rimex, where he was overseeing the planet's development into a major trade hub. The colony that had been attacked by the Zephyrians was now a thriving city, where former enemies worked together in businesses, schools, and research centers. Governor Scartooth wants to show you something, he reported over the communication network. He's been working on a special project. The image that appeared on their displays showed the original Valkyrie governor's residence, the small building that had been their first successful test of human architectural principles. But it had been expanded into something magnificent. A complex of connected buildings that served as both home and community center, where Valkyrie families gathered not just for safety, but for celebration. This is our gift to the humans, came Scartooth's grinding voice over the speakers. A building designed by Valkyrie for Valkyrie, but using principles we learned from humans. We call it Gratitude House. The image panned across gardens where Valkyrie children played safely, meeting rooms where adults discussed philosophy and art, workshops where craftspeople created beautiful objects for the sheer joy of making something lovely. It was everything the original palace on Velkron Prime had never been. Not just a place to survive, but a place to live fully. Yu Seiram had been tracking similar developments across the galaxy from her orbital research station. 37 species have now created their own architectural schools based on human principles. They're not just building human-style buildings. They're developing their own interpretations of what home means. The success had attracted attention from beyond the known galaxy. Deep space monitoring stations were detecting signals from civilizations so distant they had never been contacted before. The messages were simple. We have heard that beings in your galaxy have learned to build homes instead of shelters. Please teach us. Elder Thalos had called it the greatest peaceful revolution in galactic history. Species that had been enemies for millennia were cooperating. Nomadic cultures were settling down and building stable societies. Aggressive civilizations were redirecting their energy toward creation instead of destruction. But perhaps the most significant change was the hardest to measure. Choi Woo-jin, now overseeing human architectural projects on over 300 worlds, had noticed it in his daily interactions with alien clients. They're not just hiring us anymore, he told his team during their weekly meeting. They're befriending us. When a Velkari invites you to dinner in their home, when a Carithian shares their hive song with you, when a Zephyrian slows down just to walk beside you and talk, that's not business. That's family. The galaxy had discovered something it had never had before: trust. As Taeho walked through New Harmony's evening market, watching dozens of species trading, talking, and sharing meals together, he thought about that first, nervous, meeting with Thrakmor on Station Omega 7. The Velkari ambassador had been so afraid, so desperate for something his people couldn't create for themselves. Now Thrakmor lived in a beautiful home on Velkron Prime, surrounded by gardens where his grandchildren played with youngsters from 6 different species. The former warrior spent his days teaching other species about cooperation, and his evenings writing memoirs about the transformation of his people from conquerors to builders of community. Taeho, came a familiar grinding voice from behind him. He turned to see Ravenclaw approaching through the market crowd. The former High General was barely recognizable. His scarred armor had been replaced by simple robes, and his 3 eyes showed peace instead of constant vigilance. I wanted to thank you again.